In less than 2 weeks, I'm entering a painting competition hosted by Element Games. So here's what I got up to last week. I finished a kit bash that, whilst not completely perfect, I absolutely adore. And to do justice to the model, and obviously to score more points from Duncan Rhodes and the other judges of the competition, I need to build him an awesome base. Hey, remember this guy from the 9th edition launch box? Well, he comes with 2 basing options, and we're going to take this little one up here and basically just use that as a foundation for what we're going to work on. So there's these kind of round parts that help the feet lock into place, except that my model doesn't have the exact same feet, so he's going to kind of awkwardly sit on top, and I just need to file those parts down. That was a pretty straightforward part of the build. I hope you're ready for the rest. I'm going to take this battered old brush. If you do this, only use a really old brush that you don't plan on actually painting with. I'm going to just mix my PVA glue, make sure the consistency is okay, because obviously it's been sitting there for a while. It's kind of tacky and a bit dried out. And yeah, I'm just going to get the entire base covered in PVA glue, making sure to avoid getting too much glue on the rock itself. The theme of my Dark Angels Army's bases is kind of forest. This obviously stems from the Lion's new lore and the forest walk ability. The idea of an entire Dark Angels army coming out of the Mirror Caliban realm into battle is really cool to me. I use a lot of grass tufts and try and emulate natural colours. I've decided for this base to try adding like a little pond almost, so that's why we're building up PVA in a sort of semicircle around the rock at the front. Once I'm happy with the glue, I'm putting it in the sand. I'm leaving it for a good couple of hours to start curing. I'm not letting it fully cure, and this is why. After tapping off as much sand as possible, I'm just taking my finger around the rim of the base and scraping up all of the overhanging parts where the PVA and the sand have kind of started to roll over the edge of the base itself. This is why I don't wait until it's fully cured, because this step is much easier whilst the glue is still a little bit damp. Taking another brush that I'm really not very precious about, I'm just going to use this to mop up any kind of loose particles of sand, and also dig out a little hollow for this pond that we're thinking of putting at the base of the rock. Make sure you give your brushes a really good clean if you are getting PVA on them. So to start with, we're taking Mornfang Brown, and we're just going to cover the entire base. We don't really need to get the rock, but the entire base is getting covered in Mornfang, and just let it saturate through the sand. I should probably mention that at this point, the PVA glue has entirely dried, and so it's pretty safe for me to put the paint on without getting PVA all over the place, or pushing the sand around and changing the shape that I've created. Next, I'm taking some Mechanica Standard Grey. This is going to be the foundation of our rock. You'll notice my Mornfang Brown hasn't entirely dried, and I'm not too worried about picking up just a little bit of that Mornfang on my brush. And where I do, you'll see that I start to dab the Mornfang kind of all over the rock a little bit in places just to create additional texture. It looks a lot more natural because rocks aren't flat grey. Next, I'm taking Doomball Brown. This step, again, the Mournfang isn't entirely dry. We're just taking this because it's a darker brown and we're going to use it to fill the bottom of our pond. This just kind of shows that the earth is a little bit more damp, which is also why we're putting it around the base of the rock. We're then taking some Agrax Earthshade, and I'm basically just doing more of the same. Once this is entirely dry, I'm basically just going to do the exact same thing with Agrax Earthshade, and just focus even more on the recesses and the bottom of the pond, just to make a really clear defining line of where the rock ends and the ground begins. Now that that's dry, I am going to take some PVA glue and I'm going to take just a tiny splash of Croxagore scales, just the smallest amount, just to tint PVA. Now, there are far better materials available if you are wanting to create ponds. Have a look. There's all sorts that you can get. There's resins and all kinds of things. I just really wanted to try something out and use things that I had available at home. So I'm using this mixture and I'm just spreading it out very, very carefully to fill the pond and also overflow a little bit and cover the ground. This is a bit of a gamble, but like I said, I don't have any other things at home because I haven't made water on bases before. Now that that's dry, we're going to take some Balo Brown, and this is going to be a dry brush step. This is just to get ourselves some nice texture on all of that sand. Please excuse my camera. It has been going crazy this week. I've yet to figure out why, but we'll get to the bottom of it. So yeah, this is just dry brushing the dirt, just to give it some texture. But whilst you're there, you might as well put just a little bit on the rocks. Again, the more colors you kind of add to rocks, the more natural it looks. And since we're going to be dry brushing that later with grays, it's not going to look as ridiculous. And then repeating this step, Zandri dust, a slightly lighter dry brush because this is a paler color, and this will just pick out a few more details on the ground and just make it look really nice. Bringing in Eshin Grey. This is where we'll start to dry brush our rock. So more dry brushing, let's just get all of that out the way now. As you dry brush, the colors that we've added on, the extra browns that we've added to the rock are still going to be there. They're just going to be a bit more subtle because obviously as we dry brush, we hit all of the kind of highlights. And this makes for a far more rugged and natural looking rock effect. And we're just going to repeat this step with Dawnstone just to get a little bit more definition. Next, we have Bieltan shade. This is quite an important step, but one that you might not appreciate initially. So we're basically just taking this shade and we're making a couple of select patches green. We're going to do the edges of the pond and the edges of the rock, just again to kind of create that damp effect. This is where moss would cling to. This is where algae might be sticking around. And we're just adding it very sparingly to create that kind of effect of life within the base. A lot of it's going to get covered up by grass tufts, but I think it is still an important step because the few bits of green that you see poking up really add a lot compared to the base just being brown. Back to the pond. This was entirely improvisational. The idea of the pond, how I made the pond, and then this step was all improvised, for better or worse, we'll see. I just took some Corax White and I wanted to make a ripple effect on the water. Again, there are far better ways of doing this, I'm sure. I'm sure there's plenty of tutorials. So I made this kind of ripple in the center of the pond, and then I used a sort of almost stippling motion to make the edges of the pond white. This is because we're going to add a second layer of our PVA Croxagore Scales mix, which is going to sit on top of that white detailing that we've just done. So obviously, because this is translucent, it's going to push those white details down quite a bit. And I just want to build the pond up to be a little bit deeper and have it fill out the banks that we've created just a little bit more. So now we're on to tufts. This little hole is not going to be covered up when the model is actually standing on the rock, so we need to do something about it. I decided that I'll probably put a little plant in there. The edges of the rocks are a very natural place for leaves to build up, so that's something we're going to look at. And then the rest of the sort of earth that is still available, we're going to fill up with some small tufts. I would recommend that if you do water effects and this kind of thing at the same time, wait for your water effects to finish drying. I am just impatient, but you should not follow my example. So I'm just getting started, putting down mostly very small grass tufts just around the base. A lot of the time when you see grass tufts, it'll be, 1 to 3 tufts on a base, because a lot of people use them for a kind of plains or desert look. With something that I'm intending to be a forest, there needs to be a much bigger variety of colors, and there needs to be a lot of coverage. If you're in a forest, the forest floor isn't just going to have like a couple of tufts of grass or shrubs here and there. If it's a wild forest, the ground is going to be absolutely covered. So this is something I've started doing for my Dark Angels, just because on a smaller base where I don't really have the room to put logs or lots of rocks, a surplus of tufts is quite convincing for a forest floor aesthetic. Another thing I will say is that smaller tufts are available, and that is something I am going to be looking at doing very soon, getting some 2mm tufts that are much shorter, much smaller in general, and absolutely peppering the floor with them, with just a couple of larger shrubs and tufts kind of coming up in between. I think that would look more natural than what you're seeing here. But nevertheless, I really enjoy the effect that we're creating. And here you can see I'm just cutting up a little bit of shrub so that we can jam it into that awkward hole designed for the captain's foot that this rock comes from. And I'm just using my craft knife to kind of jam the bits in there. Once we're happy, I'm just taking this little pair of scissors and I'm trimming off all the kind of excess bits that stick out to the sides. This just makes it look a little bit neater, a little bit nicer. And to me, it helps it feel a little bit more finished. A fantastic hack that I saw on Instagram not too long ago is to use dried herbs to act as leaf litter. So I'm just putting a couple of splashes of super glue on the base, sprinkling on some dried basil, and then almost as soon as it's down, tapping off as much as possible, getting rid of all the extra bits and just scraping any bits away with my craft knife, just leaving a nice small layer of basil in place where the superglue was. And we're going to pick a couple more places to just add some of that detail. This effect just gives us a lot of extra texture. It helps break up the brown that we've painted, and it just creates a much more natural look. The final thing we're going to add is some of this Army Painter Summer Undergrowth. This is quite hard stuff to work with because it comes in such big clumps, but you generally want much smaller pieces. So I'm just taking my time to find something that we can really sort of work with. And this looks like a nice little piece that might trail across the top of the rock and hang down over the water. So that's what we're going to try out. Unfortunately, it is quite difficult stuff to stick down, so I'm going to have to hold it in place for quite a while until the super glue kind of starts to get a grip of it. And I often add a couple of pieces of this to bases, but since we've already crowded this one so much with the tactical rock and with the pond that it's overlooking, I'm only going to add this one piece. And to finish, we're going to go more or less back to where we began, Mornfang Brown. I'm just taking a little bit of blue tack, sticking it to the underside of the base so that I've got something to hold on to. And we're just going to take the Mornfang Brown and repaint the rim of the base. This will need a few layers to look nice and solid. The final thing that we're going to do is spray on some matte varnish, and then after that's dry, apply some gloss varnish to the water. And we have a base that I think is fit for a painting competition. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Basing is something that I really enjoy doing. It's a lot of fun for me. It's something creative that we can do that comes together far faster than painting. And for me, I get the gratification that I've made something good, and I get that little dopamine hit just quite a lot faster than actually painting anything. It's also absolutely something that can make a huge difference to whether your mini looks good or excellent. And maybe it's just because I enjoy this part of the hobby so much, but it's definitely worth investing in for your own enjoyment and to just take your models to the next level. If you've got any thoughts or feedback, please let me know in the comments. But I gotta go now because I need to paint the actual model ready for next week. Thank you so much again for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.